Trigger warnings for the session. This session includes mentions of anti-native racism, colonization of indigenous peoples, and overall pluralphobia. Specific topics such as police violence, underreported deaths, drinking water advisories, rates of incarceration, and violence against indigenous peoples will be discussed in today's session. Please take care of yourselves and prioritize your well-being while engaging with this content.
What I'm about to say may shock you, but it needs to be said. You might think that it has nothing to do with plurality at all, but in fact, it very much leads up to it. You'll see. Natives are killed in police encounters at a higher rate than any other racial or ethnic groups according to data from Disease Control and Prevention and CDC date from 1999 to 2015, yet rarely do these deaths gain the national spotlight. Though, keep in mind, they don't capture all Native deaths in police encounters due to people of mixed race and a relatively large homeless population that is not on the grid and are thus horrifically underreported. As of November 1st, 2021, there are 71 First Nations communities under drinking water advisories, 17 out of which had at least 2 water advisories in place. 97% of Indigenous peoples experience violence by at least one non-Native person. 97%. Natives are the largest group per capita in the prison system and are more likely to be affected by police violence than any other group. The lack of media attention doesn't help this either. An Indigenous person in Canada is more than 10 times more likely to have been shot and killed by a police officer in Canada since 2017 than a white person in Canada. Indigenous Canadians are 11 times more likely than non-Indigenous Canadians to be accused of homicide. 56% more likely to be victims of crimes than other Canadians. And in 2016, Indigenous Canadians represented 25% of the national male prison population and 35% of the national female prison population. See, from my experience and in many others, schools don't teach about Natives, or our histories, or any of the many atrocities committed against us. We aren't in media, we aren't in TV, we aren't in film or entertainment. At all. Like, think about it. When was the last Native celebrity you can think of at the top of your head? Besides Lily Gladstone. And even then, she's relatively recent. Exactly. Not very many or none at all. Right? So, for many, we're out of sight, we're out of mind, so we don't exist to the outer world. But the issue is that this invisibility could be a matter of life and death for some people. People just aren't paying attention. This information is out there and readily available too. And honestly, it's time non-Native people start paying attention. 1 in 3 Natives live below the federal poverty line, with 16.4% living in a home in need of major repairs. And 17.1% of Natives live in crowded housing. I'm about to do a quick content warning for brief talk of suicide, nothing explicit, but it does vary depending on the region and tribal affiliation. But rides are particularly high in the Southwest, the Northern Rocky Mountains, and the Great Plains, Alaska, and the Arctic. This is often correlated to substance abuse, depression, and poverty, as well as intergenerational trauma. In 2015, the National Congress of Natives found that 40% of women who are victims of trafficking are Native/First Nations women. And then there's the childhood poverty rate, 29.2%. Again, another content warning for pregnancy. 29.4%. Domestic violence, 48% for Native women and 41% for Native men. And the high school dropout rate is 10.1%. Content warning for a brief talk of SA. Approximately 2 out of 3 Native women are SA'd and attacked by non-Native men, with 59% of Native women reporting being in relationships with non-Native men. And 71% in all of these attacks, these victims knew her attacker, with over half of Native girls and women reporting experiencing this. We also have the highest rate of diabetes. Native children experience PTSD/CPTSD at the same rate as combat veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Think about that. That's crazy. With, unfortunately, queer and trans youth being a lot of those cases. And then there's the recent murder of Next Benedict, a two-spirited person who was murdered this year. Yeah. So, y'all might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with plurality, right? Because everything I just mentioned isn't inherently related to systems, but they do relate to the topic because, with all this in mind, this does lead to the following question. It begs the question, especially aimed at any medical professionals and therapists who may be listening. With everything I previously mentioned and more, how will traumagenic indigenous systems, especially indigenous systems with DID or OSDD, that are likely horrifically underreported, get the help they need with everything impacting our communities? It's a loaded question. And quite frankly, I can't really say I have the answer to that. But for the sake of my friends and my communities and the overall indigenous community, that something change, because it's crazy. Because, and even so, even in the plural community, it's overwhelmingly white. I will say that, to be blunt and quite honest. Like, you know what I mean? It's overwhelmingly white, and not all of our experiences as indigenous systems, let alone systems of color, like, we don't always get, like, our opinions heard. And honestly, I do think that needs to change. And that's not even getting to how so many indigenous people that I know, indigenous systems included, get told that our own spirituality and religions was demonic and wrong. That's not even getting into residential systems, like the residential schools. That there's a lot that I haven't covered here. We have a lot of issues. And one of the reasons why I made this presentation was because we just aren't getting the help we need. So to any medical professionals who might be listening to this, I ask that you believe the indigenous people who tell you they are systems. Believe them. I need non-natives to understand this has been going on for over 500 years. It's still ongoing too, and it's far from over. And we natives cannot do this on our own. Our children are still being stolen from our families. So many indigenous people are overrepresented in the prison system. Our lands and resources are still being stolen from us. Understand that Canada and America, it was built on the blood and bones of the genocide and slavery of indigenous people and the enslavement and dehumanization of black people. That's why I'm asking that the plural community takes indigenous sovereignty and black liberation seriously. Because this inherently goes hand in hand with every other kind of topic you can think of. Because it matters. And little to nothing has been done. My indigeneity, in my experience, is inherently tied to my plurality. Both for traumagenic reasons, like, and associated with my DID, and as well as cultural origins, right? One of the reasons why so many of our traumagenic system members formed, it was a defense in the act of colonial violence on my body as an indigenous person. I have also been told that whenever I would mention my indigenous spirituality to certain people, I won't be mentioning any names, that it was demonic and wrong. And that's just so messed up to say to a young child, you know? But I also, at the same time, it's like, as I said before, I do not want this to be all doom and gloom, so I suppose I'll continue by saying that there's actually a few of our system members who are inherently related to some of our indigenous cultural stories. In my headspace, there's a giant world turtle, because in many Turtle Island traditions, the world was carried on the back of a turtle, hence Turtle Island, right? I discovered him recently, a few years ago, and I named him Meekjeej, which is turtle in Mi'kmaq. I've also found thunderbirds in our system, and it's honestly just to see, even subconsciously, how my indigeneity intertwined with my plurality is honestly astounding to me. And I've also heard and seen of other indigenous systems who have very similar experiences to me. And that's genuinely so beautiful. Like, regardless of origins, that's beautiful. Though keep in mind that it is not the same as, say, an altar in a DID system. It's not the same, right? And even then, we personally don't use the term altar, but I'm just using that as an example. It's also worthy to note that one of our abusers inherently, made some of us, made us. Again, I won't elaborate, but I feel like that had to be mentioned just as a saying. Our trauma was the continuation of that generational trauma. And as such, because these, system members, right, I would find it insulting if I were to refer to them as an altar, because, this is more, I feel as if it's like a gift or a spiritual guide or a protector, right? Rather than just a traumagenic system member. I feel like it would be insulting the creator if I were to see it as anything else. So as such, Meekjeej and a few others of ours are inherently cultural and spiritual. And as such, whenever I see people say that, oh, it can't possibly be real, well, A, that's super racist, and B, that just isn't fair to many systems, right? Because even the DSM-5 said, outside of DID, there are plenty of, plural or plural adjacent types of plurality that could be seen as cultural. And not that long ago, our indigenous ancestors, we weren't allowed to practice our religions, any of our spiritualities at all, because we would either be thrown in prison or killed. That's how bad it was. So to see that continue in my system, that's extremely important to me. To see Meekjeej in our headspace is very important. If it wasn't for Meekjeej, a lot of our inner world would be kind of a catastrophe. And so I ask y'all to keep an open mind around stuff like this. Meekjeej doesn't speak, but its presence is extremely comforting to us. It always tells us with a blink of its eye or just a simple nod of the head that everything's gonna be okay. And we just keep going on and on and on. My indigeneity is inherently tied to our plurality, and nothing can change that. And it's because of our past that we, as a collective, hold these beings close to us. Meekjeej, the thunderbirds, They're all important. Just as important as any of our traumagenic system members are. And that's beautiful. In a way, I feel like creators blessed us. It's an encouragement to keep reconnecting, to keep doing our sacred medicines, to keep talking with the elders, to keep fighting for indigenous rights, for my rights, and for the rights of other peoples, right? Because if you're an activist, you can't just fight for yourself and your own. You have to fight for everybody else, too. Because, you know, one of my elders told me all my relations as a concept, a very sacred concept. Everything is connected. And if I remember right, I'm not a scientist or anything, but chemistry even agrees with this. If any of y'all are scientists, feel free to, like, I don't know, tell me about it or something. So, our plurality and our indigeneity is an integral part of our survival, safety, and our happiness, and we wouldn't have it any other way, traumagenic or non-traumagenic. So, with that said, I hope that by the end of this, I do hope that some of this has brought some amount of knowledge to you, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask, as long as it's respectful. If there's anything else you might want us to clarify, feel free to ask. I realize that a lot of this has been heavy, but I do want to end this on a light note, so I'm very grateful that y'all are here listening. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And with that said, Misit Nogoma, all my relations. Bye!